have an epidemic. There are children killing children, and we need to wipe it out.
A call to action after a 7-year-old boy is shot to death in southwest Miami-Dade. What will stop the teen gun violence?
Sunday, it was a 7-year-old. Monday, a day later, a 13-year-old got shot 3 times. And today, right before this meeting, we had a shootout on the other side of this community. So that's unacceptable.
The community comes together to demand more aggressive policing and promises to help police catch the killers. A judge in Tallahassee okays a new map for the state Senate districts. The political landscape of Florida is going to change. We will take it to the round table. Good morning, welcome, Happy New Year. Glad you could join us on this Sunday morning. Glenna is off today. Our focus today is on the epidemic of gun violence here and the record number of deaths of children and teenagers. We were all shocked, I think, when a 7-year-old boy, Amir Castro, was shot to death as he played inside a home in southwest Miami-Dade. This bright little boy was the innocent victim of a drive-by shooting. They have become all too common, especially in Miami-Dade. So what has caused the spike in teen gun violence? Why are guns so readily accessible to young men who are willing to use them and who put so little value on human life? Altogether, more than 60 children, 60 kids and teens have been shot in Miami-Dade in the last year. About half of them died. These kinds of shootings also occur, of course, in Broward County, but they have reached epidemic proportions in Miami-Dade. When police investigate, they usually run up against a brick wall, nothing but silence. People are afraid, with good reason, of retaliation. We want to talk about this all this morning with our guests. They are experts in the field. Morris Copeland is director of the Miami-Dade Juvenile Services Department, which means he runs the county's Juvenile Assessment Center. That's the facility where kids are taken when they are taken into custody by police. More than 190,000 juveniles have been processed at the JAC since it opened. Judge Frank Orlando served for 21 years in juvenile and family courts in Broward. He has been honored for his work over many years on behalf of children. He now heads the Center for the Study of Youth Policy at Nova Southeastern University Shepherd Broad College of Law. Lamarck Anderson is a college assistance program counselor at Miami Northwestern High, which has had 4 of its students shot to death in the last year. They were not killed at the school. The school, however, has suffered from those losses. Mr. Anderson, also a leader in the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence program. Quite an excellent program. Judge, gentlemen, thank you for all coming in. I really appreciate it. If I can, Mr. Copeland, let me turn to you since, well, you've all made this your life work, but why have we seen this spike in gun violence involving teenagers, mainly young black men?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and we wrestle with that every day, myself and also law enforcement, trying to find out the root causes of this epidemic. What I can tell you is that the individuals that are committing these types of offenses have a similar profile.
And what is that profile?
And these individuals primarily come from single-family households with parents, with mothers being the head of household. Right. They suffer from some mental health, some substance abuse issues. They have a history of failure in school. They're not your standout athletes, so there's nothing particularly exciting about them.
What about gang involvement?
Some of them are involved in gang involvement. So all of these risk factors that these young men exhibit are very, very volatile when you place a handgun or a machine gun in their hands at the age of 15, 16, and 17.
Where they don't have the judgment that somebody older might say, this is going to cause carnage. I mean, if I use this gun.
Correct.
But if you're 15 or 16, Judge, I mean, you have seen this over the years. You sat in court where you saw young men, especially, come before you who had used guns and used them against other kids.
Michael, my time back in as a juvenile court judge, I didn't see many gun-related things. I think what's happened over the years is that a lot of kids are getting targeted by the adults who make the guns so readily available to them at this present time. Kids live what they learn. If they grow up in a violent society, they think violence is the way of life. They grow up striving for respect, but they don't get respect. The only way you get respect is to join the violence. And if you think want to know where the guns are coming from, ask the adults. They're the ones making them available for these kids. And the kids look at that as, if I have a gun, I'll be respected.
And
they don't get the respect they need to say, I have a stake in a future. I can become a success. Where they live and how they're treated is such that they don't have that feeling. They feel like the only way to be a success is to be violent and let everybody look at me and say I'm tough.
Yeah. Mr. Anderson, you are in the trenches. You deal with kids every day at Miami Northwestern.
Yes, sir.
And do you tell me about your experience as a counselor?
Well, for as my little 18 years in the school system,
it's not little. That's substantial.
Well, I feel very honored to work with young people, especially young males. And it looks as though that these young men are being misled. They're very impressionable because we live in a very impressionable society.
Right.
And I just believe these young men need some guidance because they're probably coming from a single parent background. We got some economic issues within the community. That's very important. A lot of our young men are being thrust into the, I would say, the father-like figure at home because they have other little siblings that look up to them. And
they're 15, 16 years old, but they have a young brother or a sister, and they've got to take on responsibilities for which they have no training.
Correct. And it's a task. It's really a task. But all in all, at Miami Northwestern, we really strive to teach our young men how to be a young man. Okay, the situations that are going on out here in the community is just really unheard of right now.
Yeah.
We're all at an awe as to the gun violence within the community, and it has to be some type of answer for it.
Well, there must be, and that answer has to be political. It has to be societal. I mean, it is on many levels. I mean, it has to be a broad spectrum response to this epidemic of gun violence.
Yeah, I think that we went through this process of really talking about this at length when we had the Sandy Hook shootings.
Yeah.
And then we had a couple of shootings that occurred in Miami. And we got together as a community to do just that, to bring the politicians, the law enforcement, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations to the table to come up with a plan of action to address some of these things. And some of that stuff has already been put into effect, and it's come to fruition. We just need to continue that process and make sure that we build it to scale.
Right.
You know, Michael, we have to be careful what we call epidemics, because there is not an epidemic of shootings by children against children. What there is an epidemic of gun violence because of the availability of guns. And the epidemic, the use of guns by children takes place when lawmakers use things like an uptick in the statistics or the data. You can't base things on 1 or 2 years of data. I can remind you that a few years ago when we had tourist killings here and on I-10, the legislature ran to totally criminalize the juvenile justice system.
Right.
That's where the direct file came from. And there has to be some form of direct file to get the really dangerous kids out, but not the kind Florida has.
All right, well, let's clarify, and you're the judge, so forgive me, but what you're saying is that some kids, teenagers, who break the law ordinarily would appear in a juvenile court setting, but instead, thanks to the legislature and those incidents you mentioned, they are being taken into the adult criminal courts, right?
Yes, and a lot of kids are being taken into the adult courts that do not have a criminal background. They have one instance, they have a gun, that's on an automatic. But there are states that have, in legislatively put on the boards a policy where all three branches of government is involved in making that decision. In Florida, it rests one place. There are some prosecutors, like the prosecutor in this community, who look at that with a reasonable effort. But
well, Mike Satz in Broward County, Kathy Fernandez-Rundle in Miami-Dade. You know, Mr. Copeland, let me just ask you, when the Jack opened, I did a lot of reporting, but explain how you process young people who've been picked up by police and the wide spectrum of forces that are brought to bear upon each case.
Well, we sit in a very unique position. We have an agreement with all law enforcement agencies. When a child is taken into custody or arrested, they're transported to our facility. At that point, we provide the booking, we do the photograph, fingerprinting, a positive identification, and then we communicate with everybody that's involved in that child's life, all the collateral contacts, parents, school, aunts, uncles, clergy, whoever is involved in that child's life, to really paint a picture of that child. And then we do an assessment on that child to find out what the mental health, substance abuse, any issues that that child is experiencing at that time.
Want a full picture of this child.
Full picture. And then we package that up, and then we forward that to the courts at that point in time, the state attorney, the public defender, and the administrative office of the courts, the judges. But at that point, we make a determination, given the power by the state attorney's office, to divert almost half of that population out of that juvenile justice system, because we know the deeper the children go into that system, the more likely they are to come back, to recidivate. And so we've had a lot of success on taking that low-level offender out of that process, and they don't have records and all the other stuff that goes along with that when they move forward in their life.
What about the recidivism rate when you have taken a child and brought to bear all these, programs and people to care for that child? Do they break the law again, or do they stay out of harm's way?
The area that we've had a lot of success in is that diversion population, which we control. And about 85% of those children complete the program successfully, and only 9% recidivate. So we have the formula in place in order to be successful. The area that we have the most challenges is, which is not our area of responsibility, is those deep end children. Those children that go to residential facilities, those children that are put on probation for an extended period of time, those children recidivate at a much higher rate.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back and talk about them, and also want to talk about where these guns come from and why they are so easily available. That seems to be a big issue. Stay with us. We'll be right back. On this Sunday morning, live in our studio, three experts in troubled teens and how to deal with them. Judge Frank Orlando, Morris Copeland, and Lamarck Anderson from Miami Northwestern. And we'll get to guns in just one second. But Mr. Anderson, I want you to just make clear the distinction that, the four students at Miami Northwestern, which has a proud tradition, they were not killed anywhere near the school. The school itself, you say, is a safe haven, a safe place.
Oh yes, I can truly say that about that, Mr. Pugney. Nothing goes on Miami Northwestern campus. Okay, I want people to understand that. It seems like the school has now a big old giant persona, or people have their own judgment. I can be in a grocery store and I can have my Miami Northwestern shirt on.
What do people say?
First thing they say, Mr. Anderson, what's going on at Northwestern? And like I always tell them, nothing. Because nothing actually happens on campus. The school is a safe haven. Our leader, our principal, Mr. Wallace Aristide, he has put together a real good administrative staff. He has a lot of young men, including myself, who really believes in the work that he's doing and trying to make the school very, very, very safe for our students. As I tell people, we have a lot of great things that are going on there. And,
but it's got, if I may interrupt, it's just, and I know you do. I have been to Miami Northwestern, but it is just so traumatic. I mean, to think that you are a student at Miami Northwestern and your classmate, somebody who sat next to you, has been shot and killed, and that happened four times in this last year.
And, to be on the honest side of it, one of the students, I think the first student, Mr. Coles, that happened back in April of 2015.
Yeah.
He was in my class.
Really?
So it really touched the young men that I teach, because I teach 5 classes of males, young black males and Hispanic males as well. It's called Recapturing the Vision. The program was founded by Dr. Jacqueline Delazario. I really enjoy working with the young men. I tend to really believe in what they're trying to do. And like I said, there's no such thing as a bad child. Okay, he or she have been misled, or they have been impressed. Because like I said, this particular generation, very, very impressionable.
Well, I admire I think we all admire your idealism and your belief in these kids. I'm sure that they feel it when you do.
Yes.
On the other hand, not on the other hand of what he is saying, but Judge Orlando, the fact is that a kid who gets involved in gangs or gets involved in drugs can find a gun in this community. And how do we keep guns out of the hands of young men?
At the present time in Florida, that's a very complex issue, and I couldn't tell you how you do that, because we're awash in guns. And what happens is kids that don't go to a school like he's talking about, that go to schools where they have one, a policy. If you come to school with a gun, no matter how many times you've been good and everything, you get kicked out. Right. What happens is kids live in violence. They don't get the things they need. The schools are not safe havens like he's talking about. They come in possession of weapons. Now, if they're in possession of weapons and they have them and they see that they need protection and then they use that gun, they're adolescents, remember, and adolescents are very irresponsible. We were all irresponsible adolescents. We're just fortunate that what we did didn't cross the line, or it may have crossed the line and we didn't get caught. These kids have guns, and if you put them in a position where they feel threatened, or they're feeling so disrespected that they're going to use the gun in a fit of irresponsibility, the way you do that is get the adults to recognize that the ease with which we can get a gun in Florida is the underlying cause of these kids, and we should stop blaming them. Those guns are being you got to blame them for what they do, but not because they have guns. Right. Guns are being put in their hands by irresponsible adults, including the legislature.
Well, and the legislature is about to pass a law in the upcoming session that's going to make open carry and guns on state college and university campuses, I suspect. Mr. Copeland, what about the relationship between communities where these crimes are occurring with young people and the people who live there? I had said during the break, if I lived in the Liberty Square housing project, 62nd and Northwest 12th Avenue or so in Miami, where there were drug dealers and really violent young men who, have guns, and I saw a crime, I understand why those people are reluctant to come forward. They fear retaliation, and there have been witnesses who have in fact been threatened and killed.
Well, with that said, in terms of the young people that we work with, they do speak of that in terms of their fear, and their parents talk about it. We do our walkthroughs or walking one-stops after some heinous crime is committed. We talk to people door to door, and they say that. But then there's also a lot of good people that want these issues resolved, and they do talk. Right. So I think that the fact that everybody's not saying anything is not necessarily the truth, but there is a segment of our community that promotes that. But the majority of those people in those communities, I say over 95% are law-abiding folk that want to live in safe, secure communities. Right. And they will speak up if given the opportunity.
Well, we just saw over this weekend that people in Liberty City spoke up about a felon who had just been released from prison, who went into a convenience store, threatened people with an AK-47, and they turned him in because they knew that he was threatening. I think that's positive. And also, Mr. Anderson, after Amir Castro died and was shot to death, people in that Richmond Heights Goulds community stepped forward, and they found the alleged killers within about 24 hours.
Yes, yes. As I stated to you before, nothing goes on our school campus, and it is a community problem. Now, if you want to take a page out of the Richmond Heights situation, the citizens there of Richmond Heights, they got together. I mean, 7-year-old young man was shot, gunned down.
People were
people
horrified.
just got fed up with that.
Well, they should.
They really have.
And you know, Judge, while we have about a minute left, I have to say, and I'm going to make a commentary late in the program, that I hear outrage in Richmond Heights and Liberty City and Gould's and Miami Gardens. I don't hear very much outrage in Parkland and Coral Gables and Pinecrest because I think a lot of white people in South Florida say, hey, it's not my problem.
Well, I think you're very right about that, Michael, because the places where the kids we're talking about are isolated. The things that they need are not going there. The schools that they go to are not giving them the things. I can tell you that here in Dade County, you have 2 programs, AMI Kids, and we have one in Fort Lauderdale, and there's 52 in the United. You go there, there's 60 to 70% African-American kids there. They're different because in that school they get respect, they get things. They're given a part of their education, things that are fun for them, diving, canoeing, not paid for by the government, paid for by private funding.
Great.
The alumni that come out of that school, my friend Judge Gladstone, who recently passed away, was one of the, and Judge Gelber, was they're responsible for these 2 programs becoming models that they are today. In Fort Lauderdale, our program is a model. Every time the school board cuts the fundings for these things, we can take care of less
but
students.
there's a great return for the investment in those programs. Also, as we're running out of time, I also want to point out that you are a leader in the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence program, and that is a wonderful program. More power to you. And
thank you.
Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who began it, and long may it thrive.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming in. We're going to continue this with our roundtable in just a minute, but thanks very much. All right, up next, we will take it to the roundtable, so stay with us. All right, it is that time for a closer look at the week's top news stories, some analysis and opinion from our Powerhouse Roundtable. Oh, we've got a great group for that today. Glad to welcome back Dr. Robert Malone, who mentors troubled teenagers. He is a substitute teacher and has been a college recruiter. Tangela Sears is a well-known community activist in Miami with a huge social media following, especially on Facebook. After she lost her son David, she started a group called Mothers of Murdered Children. And we're also glad to welcome back our friend Nancy Ankrum, editorial page editor of the Miami Herald. To all of you, good morning. So great to have you here. So, Tangela, I don't want to make this too personal, but when you see the stories like a 7-year-old child, Amir Castro, shot to death in a drive-by shooting, it just, I know it breaks your heart.
It's painful.
Yeah.
It's different.
So what do you think could prevent that? What could save a child like Amir or any other child in our community from, you know, being shot in a drive-by or any other shooting?
One of the things I look at is when I look at the alleged killers of this kid, there is a past there. These gun charges that's allowing these young men to come back to the street, it allows them to come back and take a life. We need the laws enforced. So
you would say to the state attorney, if there has been a young person who was found with a gun, don't give them a break, go ahead and prosecute them? We need them prosecuted. That will save another child's life. Yeah. Nancy, what do you think?
You know, it's so multifaceted, unfortunately, and one reason, the reason Amir is dead is because allegedly it was a drug fight between adults. Amir had absolutely nothing to do with this. And so when we look beneath gun violence, we of course see gang warfare. We do see a cultural indifference to the value of human life, but we also see criminal activity fueling violent criminal activity within too many of these neighborhoods.
Right. As we understand that situation, the two young men who were later arrested had allegedly come to the house earlier and had tried to do a marijuana deal, and the 19-year-old cousin of Amir, Michael Tobler, who's been arrested as well, allegedly pulled out a gun and held it on him, and they left, and then they came back with a AK-47 and opened fire and indiscriminately. Dr. Everett Malone, you have been working with troubled kids for a long time. Yeah. I mean, here we're looking at pictures of the mother of Amir Castro, the family members. I mean, they're just utterly devastated. And yet, I think we all feel kind of powerless to change this, but it must change. Well,
I want to send out my condolences to the Castro family and Eric Watson Jr. Yeah. He was shot 4 times. And you know, I heard the last segment, but see, I have a no excuse zone in my world. This is a matter of choice. This young man came to the house, he saw the children over there, okay? He went back and shot into a house full of children and killed a 7-year-old boy. Right. A young man walking down the street, Eric Watson, was shot 4 times. He was not doing anything. We have these shootings all over the country. And what I am kind of frustrated at is that our approach, our concern and focus is on the police. We have 480 homicides in Chicago with 2,800 shooting victims, right? Almost 350 homicides in Baltimore. We have about 100 or so in homicides. And when I was at Ms. Sears' event, 56 to 60 of those homicides involved black people, right? Young people are making choices out here, and they are not making these choices. They're not making the best choice. They are operating on something else. And then when you look at their Facebook page and you see young men are posing with guns.
Tell me about that, because you and I have emailed each other several times this week, and you said, look at this one young man's, one of the alleged killers, Facebook page. It shows that he has no hope for his life. What did it show?
See, and then when you frame it that way, look, the guy had a choice. You know that you are wrong when you are picture in a Facebook page with a clip and also with guns. This is something that somehow is somehow devoid of any kind of common sense and intelligence. You don't know that is wrong. And the idea that these individuals somehow affected by poverty and they have no mom and no father, that's an excuse. That is an excuse, and it's an unacceptable excuse for them to somehow now leap over every option and opportunity to get in a car with an AK-47 and kill a young man from Miami Northwestern walking home. And it was 5 young men from Miami Northwestern, not 4. So we have and kill a 7-year-old young man and almost kill this 13-year-old man. I guess I'm getting to the point where I'm tired of these excuses made.
I hear it in your voice, and I think we should all be tired of it. So, Tangela, I mean, you of course created your group to help provide solace, comfort for other parents who've lost their kids. Beyond that, what do you expect the community? What do you expect politicians to do?
What we're expecting the community to do is stand behind the families and what they want. What I seen prior to losing my son was the community meetings, but the community meetings doesn't turn into solutions for our kids. And we have so many people through our community with different agendas. Our community needs to come together and support what the families want. The families are supporting a bill, a House bill in Tallahassee, 475, that will allow witnesses' information to remain anonymous. That's important because a large percentages of the families that I represent, the problem in their cases are witnesses. So marching, meeting with the state attorney, meeting with, having community meetings, it really don't solve anything if you don't have a plan to turn it into something in Tallahassee to, affect what's going on here.
I do think that is a desperate times call for desperate measures. I think that it is dicey to allow people to testify anonymously. However, the brick wall that police run up against in so many of these communities, allowing gang members really to get away with murder again and again and again. This is something that, you know, I think states' attorneys do need to weigh in on this and really craft something that could work.
And I think you're complicit. The community is complicit. Oh, with the Chuck Rabin article about 646 shootings, and only 94% of those 94 cases have been cleared. That is a problem. That is a reflection on the community not standing up. And I don't want to hear this whole idea that, well, we're scared. Look, you don't do anything about it, it will continue to happen. You have to take control over your community, block by block, house by house. We cannot continue to say, well, we're not.
Robert, I have to disagree with the fear. There's a lot of fear out there. In fact, one of my parents, there was an article in the Miami Times about a week ago, and it dealt with a witness. That witness was killed last Sunday morning. So it's painful for a mother to lose her child because he's a witness. That's why it's important that we not go over all over the page, but we support this House Bill 475 to protect these witnesses.
I'm not going to argue. I'm sorry, Robert. I'm not going to argue one way or the other. I would simply point out, Tangela, that you know, the Constitution provides due process, and for anybody accused of a crime to be confronted by the evidence and witnesses against them. So I think that the idea of anonymity for witnesses, it would be challenged, obviously, in the courts right away.
It will be challenged, but keep in mind, there are people that information is not provided to the courts in cases, whether they be a police officers, a court, elected officials, and because we're not solving these problems, we have to do something to put something in place to allow justice to some of these cases.
What about this, Nancy? I think that one of the more shrewd ideas that I have heard over the last several months when it comes to guns, I mean, there are more than 300 million guns in this country, so you're not going to really make a lot of headway.
For every person,
you know, and all the ones that are out there are grandfathered in, so you're not going to be able to confiscate them. What about limiting the amount of ammunition that people can buy and putting serial numbers on the ammunition so that if a bullet is shot in a criminal act, the bullet could be traced to the shop that sold the bullet and also to the buyer. I mean, that seems perhaps one way to go.
I think that's one way to go. However, carried out to there are a number of logical conclusions that that could play out, including the gun was stolen and the buyer is not the perpetrator. And we see that time and time and time again, just now.
And guns are stolen all the time. I know I had my car broken into once, and they immediately went to the glove compartment looking for a gun. I didn't have one, but
that said, serial numbers, did that seller, it will allow you to discover, did that seller do the proper background check? And is that buyer actually qualified, eligible to be armed? It couldn't hurt. It's definitely not going to be the savior of
No, it's not the solution, but we've got to look for solutions. All right, stay with us. We'll be back with more of the Roundtable in just a minute. Welcome back on this Sunday morning, live in our studio. From my right is Dr. Robert Malone, Tangela Sears, Nancy Ankrum from the Herald. Tangela, during the break you were saying that you, at your last meeting, did have Miami-Dade State Attorney Kathy Fernandez-Rundle at your meeting, and you asked her would she support this piece of legislation on anonymity for witnesses. What did she say?
She told us, yes, that she will support it. She will be back at the meeting on Thursday at Antioch at 7 for a follow-up, because there's different recommendations that was made. And so we're doing a follow-up meeting to make sure that these things are being put in place.
Good. Nancy, we understand that tomorrow President Obama is going to meet with the Attorney General and talk about what he can do through executive orders. The Second Amendment in Congress, he's limited in many ways about what he could do. But he does want to try to, apparently, I read, make people who are on the terror watch list of the FBI, make it impossible for them to buy guns. The Senate rejected that just 2 days after the San Bernardino massacre.
Right. Well, they you know, the Senate's beholden to its master. But
NRA?
Yeah. However, this makes all sorts of good sense. And that is, I think, just one of the planks in what Obama and Lynch are trying to do in terms of affecting background checks and who can and cannot be sold a gun. Now, I think this will have an effect, of course, in a specific area where we have seen shooters, perhaps people with mental illness, and of course people on the terrorist watch list. When kids are able to traffic in stolen guns, in guns that can't be traced, or guns that are coming down from the pipeline from Virginia, it's not going to have that much of an effect. No, it's not going to have any effect at all.
And those guns are used for the drug business. I mean, there is a demand for those drugs in the community. The idea that somehow a truck is being backed up into inner cities all over the country and they're being handed out, they serve a purpose. And that purpose is to protect their business, and that purpose is also to kill anyone who comes against that business.
Well, anybody who doesn't believe that there is a demand for drugs, just look, about every 2 weeks, the Coast Guard will unload a huge amount of marijuana, cocaine on the docks over here at Miami Beach, and you say, well, where's that going? Well, it's coming here, among other places. I mean, there is a demand for it. Let's talk, if we can, for a minute about a couple of things that happened this week politically. Nancy, the judge in the state Senate redistricting case said all 40 senators are going to have to run for re-election. He accepted a map that essentially creates parity between Democrats and Republicans. Republicans have controlled the state legislature, the state Senate, for about 2 decades. I mean, this is really a game changer.
It could be a game changer. It is a game changer. Depends upon whether the Republican legislators decide to appeal. That is still that's still out there, that possibility.
Yeah, but Senator Joe Negron of Stewart, who is the incoming Senate president, said, forget it. I mean, they've already spent $8 million, taxpayers' money, to fight this whole redistricting issue.
Exactly. And, you know, this started with how the districts were drawn to begin with. And they were drawn behind closed doors. Well, they always are, but with some nefarious dealings going on. And so that just snowballed into the League of Women Voters and other good government organizations suing. And this is the outcome. The judge bought their map. And it does bring some parity. It does also throw some senators into a similar district.
Yeah, some are going to have to move if they want to be reelected. In about the minute that we have left, that's too little time, but I was talking, Tangela, to a very powerful figure in the National Democratic Party last night, and he says that if Hillary Clinton wants black voters to really come out in next November, if she's the nominee, and it looks like she will be, that President Obama has to go out and really campaign for her, or else the black vote will not be so great. What do you think?
His support is going to be important, and I think she needs to understand the importance of his vote in order to win that seat in 2016.
So Bill Clinton is important, but Barack Obama
is the one that will tote the black votes, and she's going to need the black votes in order to
that's
win.
the last word. Thank you all for coming in. Really appreciate it. Glad to have met your mother, whom you brought this morning. Welcome her.
Can I say hi, Mom? I've always wanted to say that.
There you go. You have just said it. All right, Robert Malone, Tangela Sears, Nancy Akram, thanks so much. All right, after the break, we will go backstage with the stars. I'm going to hang out, as it were, with the famous El Tropicana dance troupe as they made a return to South Florida. El Tropicana in Havana, probably the world's most famous cabaret and nightclub. It is a Cuban classic, and for the first time in more than 3 decades, El Tropicana, a dance troupe from there, performed In Miami the other night, I was lucky enough to go, and what a hardship assignment. I visited with some of the world-famous showgirls.
Que Tropicana esté en Estados Unidos para nosotros ha sido fabuloso.
Her name is Elizabeth. She's from Santiago de Cuba and thrilled to be in Miami. Muchacho, this girl can sing and dance. She's one of 15 Tropicana singers and dancers who have come here to put on a show that you can really only see in Havana at the Tropicana, a legendary nightclub. But that was then. The extravagant show ran from New Year's Eve through Saturday night. It featured the usual over-the-top costumes, gorgeous girls, handsome guys, and swirling hips.
Tropicana haven't been in the States, in the territory of the States, for the last 28 years, but in Miami for the last 16.
If there's any anxiety over performing in the heart of Cuban exile, we didn't see it. We saw talented dancers and singers giving it their all, even at rehearsal. When a Cuban band called Los Van Van played at the old Miami Arena in the late 90s, there was nearly a riot. Well, cut to El Tucán in 2016. How the world has changed.
It's a salute from Cuba, and everything that we could do to salute, to heal those things, I think they are very positive.
Well, I got to see the historic performance at a rehearsal. It was terrific, but if you went on New Year's Eve, it was not cheap. $450 per person. I think the show probably sold out. All right, still to come, my personal perspective about this epidemic of gun violence. There are things you can do.
Good afternoon, South Florida. Temperatures already warming up to those upper 70s. Taking a look at the radar, we are tracking that rainfall still impacting the Middle Keys. It's some heavy downpours going on. These showers headed towards the northeast. Eventually, Broward and Miami-Dade, you will get the rain. Now, again, there's a cold front and a push of cold air. But first, more rain expected by later tonight. It will be a wet one out there, even for the start of our Monday morning. Take the umbrellas and the sweaters with you. We're dipping down into the 60s tonight.
Jennifer, thank you. All right, before we leave you this morning, a personal perspective about kids, drugs, and guns. It is a deadly combination and one that we have seen all too often in South Florida, especially acute in black inner city neighborhoods in Miami-Dade, which may be why the larger white and Hispanic community is not up in arms about it. They're marching and rallying against teen gun violence in Goulds, Richmond Heights, Miami Gardens, but they are not marching or rallying, calling for change in Coral Gables or Pinecrest or Parkland. They should be. These kids who are being wounded and killed are our kids too. Their deaths touch us all. In the past year, more than 60 children and teens were shot in Miami-Dade, mostly incidents involving drugs or gangs. Or there was a perceived slight that had to be avenged, so a teenager picked up a gun, opened fire, often hitting innocent bystanders, collateral damage, and that is what happened to 7-year-old Amir Castro. This is tragic, and it's got to stop. Schools have to teach kids violence only begets more violence. Parents need to keep a much closer eye on their sons and daughters in these neighborhoods. Most of these young men never have had a stable and constant father figure in their lives. Maybe you can be one. Become a big brother or a big sister. Organizations like the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence do great work. School teachers and counselors are doing that work too, but the community at large needs to get more involved. So volunteer, be a mentor, be a reading coach, be a big brother or big sister. If you've got a business, hire a boy or a girl from a poor neighborhood. Show them the value of hard, honest work and its rewards. More than 60 children and teens wounded or killed in 1 year is simply unacceptable. We wouldn't let this go on if they were our kids. Well, these are our kids too. That's my perspective for this week. Hope you have a wonderful Sunday. Remember, as always, stay informed, get involved. And what do you think about this all? We invite you to weigh in on any topic on email, Facebook, Twitter. Any of these addresses were easy to find, and we will answer you. Have a great Sunday.